Humanity. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. Today we're going to talk about the three fundamentals that we believe, and of course our guests believe, are the keys to success. And we'll get right to that conversation right after these important messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast is presented by Faulkner University. Faulkner University is a private Christian liberal arts university based in Montgomery, Alabama, with a mission to provide an education anchored by not only intellect, but also character and service. The Faulkner experience aims to educate the whole person. Every individual matters every day. We all want to become better versions of ourselves. No one wants to remain trapped where they are because of missed opportunities and unrealized dreams. At Faulkner University, we believe your dreams don't have an expiration date. We understand that you're looking for more than a degree. You want to find your niche and thrive in your career. Whether you're a high school senior just beginning your trek or an adult student looking for a better path, Faulkner is here to help guide your journey. Go to faulkner.edu to apply or get more info. That's faulkner.edu. I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes with Three Chords Counseling in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Ben, how are you, man?
Man, I'm doing good. Thanksgiving is over. I ate way more than I probably should have. Looking forward to next weekend when I might try to run some of it off at the St. Jude Marathon. I'm not sure, or half marathon. I'm not sure where this podcast may fit into that, but just glad to be here and glad to have our special guest with us today, Mr. Jason Howton. You guys may not know Jason. I think probably before we started talking about this, I had a couple of words that we had spoken to each other. I see him and we say hi, but he probably is kind of like we are at the Hayes family reunions. It's hard to get a word in edgewise when he's surrounded by April Howton and her friends, because April is a talker. She's been on the podcast before. She is healing. We are thankful that she is in the process. I think you said she starts radiation tomorrow.
Yes, this week. Yep, tomorrow.
So, but Jason is her other half, and we're glad to have you on here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the story of you guys kind of early on in your marriage and a big transition that was kind of happening, and how that sort of, I guess, changed your world a little bit and your view of some things a little bit. So tell us a little bit about that event, what happened, and then we can kind of work into the nuts and bolts of success.
Yep, sure thing. So, back in the 2003 time frame, I had been working at a company, an aerospace company, for probably about 5-6 years at that point. And things were going very well, moving up in the company fairly quickly. And there came a point in time where, they were wanting to move me into more of a management type role, that kind of thing. The only problem with it was that it meant that we'd have to relocate to Connecticut. And if you know anything about April and I, number one, you know that we're both from Florida. So we have this aversion to cold weather. And we went on a temporary relocation, and the time of year that we went was January.
Oh, yeah.
So, that was hurdle number one. But when we arrived in Connecticut, we had to think about some other issues too. We had just had our firstborn and expecting our second. So we were looking at if we could deal with having to move 22 hours away from our nearest family. Problem number one. And then number two, what would be the impact to our spiritual lives with the challenges that you face in Connecticut versus what we were familiar with in the South. So we rapidly came to the conclusion that, this is not really going to work to accomplish the life goals that we were hoping to accomplish. So I was left in a situation where I was going to have to leave something that the world will tell you is sure and good and fantastic, and just follow this plan and you can retire, mid 50s, 60s at the latest. and you're on that course, and now you have to completely abandon that if you want to do what your heart is set on. So in doing that, I'm looking around, I'm like, there's all these people in the world who are radically successful, and they've gone out on their own, they've done these things, they've accomplished all these things. What was the key to their success? Because if I'm going to have to start over, I need to understand what these people are doing when they don't have a safety net.
Yeah.
So, I started reading many, many different authors. One of them was Dave Ramsey, which I've already mentioned to these guys. There's a book sitting on the shelf here in the studio from Dave Ramsey. So he's very popular.
Uh-huh.
Another one I read was Anthony Robbins. A lot of people are probably familiar with his name. And then a bunch of other books that people might not be familiar with their names, but even the Rich Dad, Poor Dad author, and I can't bring his name to my memory at the moment, but all those books are out there.
Yeah.
And you can see what they've done. And so one author would say, these 10 things and you can be successful, or these 5 things over here and you can be successful, or do that and you can be successful. And it appeared that they were all trying to get to the same place. And there was a thread of some thread of something running through all of it that was consistent, but they were all saying different things. So I started backing off of that, and I started thinking, if we're created the way that I fully believe that we are, then the Creator is not going to allow us to get through life without providing what we need to be successful.
Yeah.
So I started digging into the Bible, started looking at passages, especially passages like in 1 John where he says, who is it that overcomes the world but the one that has faith? So faith seemed to be like it should be one of the fundamentals. So like we typically do in the church, you start a word study and you're like, okay, well, let me see where this word study takes me. And so in doing that, I came to this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 13. And a lot of people are going to be familiar with that because it gets tossed around all the time. You can go to Hobby Lobby,
yeah,
or you can go to probably Walmart.
Yes.
And there's going to be, a poster somewhere in the building that says faith, hope, and love. But anyway, Paul says that when you strip away everything, what remains is faith, hope, and love. And he had been talking earlier in that letter in chapter 12 about spiritual gifts and about the church being the body of Christ, and how, not each individual is the same in the body. So one person has talents in this area, another person has talents in that area, one person has gifts over here, abilities over there. But once you strip all that away, the thing that is consistent with everyone is faith, hope, and love. So I'm like, can it be that simple? That these are the 3 fundamentals of success. And if I understand these the way God wants me to understand them, that I can be successful in anything I do.
Yeah.
Right. So me being in the situation I was, I asked myself, okay, well, what is the definition of faith, hope, and love? What are the definitions of these words? If somebody on the street were to walk up to me and ask me, how do you define faith? What is hope? What in the world am I going to tell them? So that's when I asked you a minute ago.
Yeah.
If I walked up to you on the street and I said, what is faith? What would you tell me? Of course, Travis hasn't answered this yet, so we're going to lay it on him. If I were to walk up to you, Travis, and I were to say, can you give me a definition of faith? What would be your response?
Well, I would probably stumble through the Hebrews verse about what faith is, but I think, to your point, I think it's almost different for everyone. I think if you look at, I think Hebrews 11, where that verse is interesting from your point, because you could take the verse that says faith is the whatever, but then you see the stories, right? Like, by faith Abraham did, So I think that's interesting that it's probably different. Like you're talking about going up to every person on the street, you're going to get a different answer.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a story more than a definition.
Yeah. And see, that's what's been interesting through these 20 some odd years is that's what happens when you walk up to somebody. The number one response I've ever gotten is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, which is what you're referring to, where faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And that was my answer. When I asked myself, okay, how would I define faith to someone? That's the answer I put out there. And I'm thinking, and I back up and I start looking at the wall and staring at the ceiling. I'm like, what does that mean?
Now we have to define the definition. So
faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
Right? That is, though, the definition that, because it's the verse specifically says faith is, right? So if it is, that means it equals this. So the trick to that verse, and it's not really a trick, but the issue there with using that verse as a definition is you have to understand everything that was written in the Hebrew letter up to that point. Because he comes into that saying, so then, then, faith is the substance and the evidence. So if you understand everything in front of that and you're living that way, then, okay, yes, faith is the substance and the evidence. But what I found interesting is if you ask an atheist what faith is, do you know what their response was going to be?
I don't.
And this year, I was in a training class with the company I'm currently working for. And faith came up somewhere in the class. And one of the definitions that one of the participants gave was belief without evidence. And that is one of the more common definitions in the world, belief without evidence. So I said, well, I don't understand what Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 is telling me unless I read the rest, but I still can't define it. And I know that belief without evidence is not right.
Yeah.
So I kept reading in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, or chapter 11, and I came to verse 6.
Yeah.
And in verse 6, technically you could back up to verse 5, and he's talking about Enoch. But in verse 6, he says, for without faith, it is impossible to please God, right? But the next two phrases are what are key into providing a definition of what faith is. For you must first believe that he is, or some translations say believe that he exists, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Some translations say diligently seek him, which is definitely what I prefer based on all the context. But that right there says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. For these are the things that would encompass faith. It's what those last two phrases are. That means if you have faith, you believe in the existence and you diligently seek.
Yeah.
So
because there's people who believe, but don't diligently seek.
Who's the most famous group that believes and doesn't seek?
James says the demons.
Demons. Exactly. So, and that's why in James' letter, he's like, I'll show you my faith by my works, right? Which a lot of people think sounds different than what Paul is, but by the time we get through this, they're saying the exact same thing in their letters.
I think to your point, I think even with the atheist, I think Kyle Butt would get on to me. He doesn't like when people say it takes more faith to believe what they believe than what we believe. So I won't use faith, but I think at some level, every human being believes something without evidence to it, right? Like even your books, if you take the books from these guys who are highly successful, they, like you said, beat around the bush. but they have at least a belief system of, if I do these things, then the percentage of me being successful is higher, right? So they may not point to a God, but I think everyone has some belief without evidence, right? That, if I believe the sun comes up tomorrow. A lot of people who watched football last night probably didn't know if the sun was going to come up the next day, and here we are. But so I think, even to your point, of people who, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't believe that God stuff, you have a belief that you base your priorities on.
Yeah, you have a belief in something. That first phrase, belief in the existence, is common absolutely everywhere. Okay. Yeah. And if you want to succeed, you're going to have both those phrases.
Right.
All right. But that first phrase is going to be common everywhere. And let me give you an example. Say there's a businessman in our community. He believes, absolutely positively believes, that there is a market for his solution to whatever problem he's wanting to solve. Okay? But if he never diligently seeks that market, what's going to happen?
He's not going to succeed.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if he believes that their market exists. If he never pursues it, nothing happens. No success, nothing.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people live their life with that first phrase, but never do anything about it. All right. So, that's the definition of faith, believing in the existence and diligently seeking. But then I was left with the quandary, okay, well, what's diligently seeking look like? Right? Yeah. Surely the Bible gives you something straightforward on what diligently seeking means. So if you turned over to 2 Peter chapter 1 and you looked at verses 5 through 10, Peter actually lays out that second phrase in specific steps. This is diligently seeking. In verse 5 of 2 Peter chapter 1, he says, so for this reason, and we can go back and look at the reasons for why he's saying it, but for this reason, add to your, and we put in there faith.
Yeah.
But you could put in there the exact same thing Hebrews is writing. Add to your belief virtue. And to virtue, add knowledge. And to knowledge, add self-control. And to self-control, add steadfastness. And to steadfastness, add godliness. And to godliness, add brotherly affection. And to brotherly affection, add love. Okay?
And so these are yours and increasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's a key.
Yeah.
That's a key when I was reading through this and thinking about success is when he follows up the next few verses, he says, if these are yours and are increasing, so there's two requirements. Right. They're yours and they're increasing. You will not fall. Well, what does that mean? You won't fail.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe we should talk about the definition of success and the definition of failure a little bit too.
I started to ask you that a while ago when you were saying success. And I think, right now you're talking about success. I mean, these passages, of course, are very specifically about success in the Christian walk. But there's also, I think what you're saying is you can apply these to business model or to anything else because you're, when you have the belief that this is something that can happen and you diligently seek it, here's what those things look like. But I was thinking that earlier, what is success in your mind? What is the definition of that?
Well, if you go do word studies on that, then what you'll find is it is the favorable or the desired outcome to an attempt. So you're making an attempt somewhere in some regard. It is the favorable or the desirable outcome of that attempt. Failure, on the other hand, is to cease or to stop the attempts prior to success.
Right.
So the good news is if there are people out there and they haven't stopped trying yet, they haven't really failed yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the good news in all this. So the Hebrew writer is telling us if we want a favorable or desirable outcome, then we're going to have to believe in the existence, and we're going to have to pursue it by diligently seeking. Okay. Peter is telling us what diligently seeking looks like.
Yeah.
Peter says you start with that belief, right? You add virtue. Now, I'm going to go to the game of football because we said that if these things are fundamental, they can be applied in every aspect of life.
Right.
So I can apply it to something as trivial as a football game. And when I say trivial, yes, I know we're making millions and millions of dollars for different schools and individuals off of something we call quote unquote trivial. But in the grand scheme of things, if the game of football vanished, we'd still go on living.
But we like football, so we're okay with that. So
I love to watch football games, especially go Knowles.
You're in good company.
yeah, that's right.
But the point is, if these things are fundamental, they will apply to everything.
Yeah.
I don't care how simple it is. So in the game of football, what is the first thing you need to play a football game?
A ball, a football.
Well, what's the football going to look like?
Oh, good point. Leather, pigskin, I guess.
Lakes, pigs.
Pigs.
So,
I mean, like a field.
I like the fact that
Yeah.
you guys are struggling with this.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing that you have to play the game of football is the rules to the game of football.
True.
Without the rule book, you don't know what the football looks like. You don't know the size. You don't know the weight. You don't know how long the football field is, how wide the football field is. You don't know what. You
You got to have some
to-
standards.
you have
You got to
to-
have the rules.
You have to have standards. What is virtue? The
Standards.
truth
Yeah.
about whatever it is. So the rule book forms what's right and what's true about the game of football.
Yeah.
And so you can't start it without that. So he's telling you specifically that you have to start with that. Then he says, add knowledge about that. Well, it doesn't, if I want to play the game of football, but I never bother to learn the rules, there's no way for me to be successful at it. You know, if I snap the ball comes to me and I don't know that guy right there from the right end is coming to lay me flat. And if I don't run, that I'm in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
So you have to add knowledge. Next, you have to control yourself to those rules. Otherwise, what happens? Penalty,
Flags.
penalty. Or like one of the games I was watching last night, guys ejected,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Didn't follow the rules.
Pulling helmets off of other
Yeah.
guys is not good.
No, spinning in other guys is, I found out in the game of football, it's not good. It's not
good,
okay.
yeah.
So, you get ejected.
Spinning, I did see that. Yeah.
You get ejected. I did not know that. But if you don't control yourself, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
All right. So then you add steadfastness to self-control. And
endurance.
right. Steadfastness, you don't give up.
Yeah.
You never give up. You want to know why the Marines are successful? They don't give up. They don't quit.
No quit in them.
No, not at all. Then you get to godliness. Either of you know another word that we might use for godliness? You know, when we're discussing this from a Christian's perspective, we understand it's devotion to God.
I would say kind of like God likeness. You're becoming like Him. So I guess kind of like bought in,
Mhm.
kind of bought into the process.
Bought in. I like that. So if you're bought in to the game of football and what your coach is doing, what do you do about it?
You do whatever He asks you to do.
What happens every day, though, after school, if you're in a high school team?
Practice watching
Practice.
film, doing something.
Practice,
Yeah.
practice,
Yeah.
practice. That's devotion.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, say, a business and somebody who's in manufacturing, you know, you'd start out with a blueprint. You would have to control yourself to the blueprint for the product. Then you would have to create a system where you're consistently making the product. But then you would have to continuously improve on what you're doing to keep the quality and improve the quality of the product.
Yeah.
So, you know, in that kind of environment, we call devotion continuous improvement, those kinds of things. Practice, practice, practice. But then there comes a time that we have to realize that we cannot do it alone. We were not designed to do life alone. In the beginning, he said it was not good for man to be alone. And so we have to understand that we have to have a team. And, you can't play football without a team, which means that you're going to have to understand how to build brotherly affection. And then after you get to the point of brotherly affection, we get into the point of love, and we'll come back and get a better understanding of love, because it is one of the fundamentals itself, but it's a self-sacrificing.
I'd say there's more sacrifice to it. And,
it's a self-sacrificing characteristic. And so, you're willing to sacrifice a benefit that you would gain for someone else on the team in order that the whole team can win.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So that when you lay that out the way Peter did, that is the path of diligently seeking. What's interesting, though, is how many different directions does that path lead you in? Trick question.
Sounds like one,
right?
I'm always afraid to answer an engineer. I never know what the answer is going to be.
There's only one direction that thing's pushing you in, and that's towards success.
Yeah.
And if you are a Christian and you take a look at where that's taking you to love, and you understand from 1 John that God is love, there's only one direction that is taking you to, and that is God.
The mission of Heritage Christian University is simple. They aim to advance the churches of Christ by equipping servants through undergraduate and graduate programs. HCU produces effective communicators of the gospel, focusing on evangelism and a commitment to Scripture. Heritage Christian University offers 5 degrees: Associate of Arts in Biblical Studies, Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies, Master of Arts, Master of Ministry, and Master of Divinity. HCU is accredited by the Association for Biblical Higher Education and is an associate member of the Association of Theological Schools. Since 1968, Heritage Christian University has offered affordable degrees in biblical studies, allowing graduates to thrive in their ministries without the burden of loan debt. In fact, most graduates finish at HCU without owing anything for their education. For the spring 2024 semester, HCU is offering full tuition scholarships for the graduate level students. For more information about the scholarships they offer, visit www.hcu.edu. HCU invites you to the 2024 Heritage event at the Marriott Shoals Conference Center. Join them on Saturday, August 24th for an incredible night of music from the legendary Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder. General admission tickets and table sponsorships are available for purchase. Visit hcu.edu to purchase your tickets today. If you think HCU is the perfect university for you, visit hcu.edu to schedule a tour or apply today. Heritage Christian University helps you thrive in your ministry. All right, Jason, you've done a great job. You've given us a good step for success and kind of whet our appetite for that. And so as we get ready to wrap up part 1, as we like to do here, we like to ask a little fun questions so that our listeners can get to know you a little bit better and might draw them into part 2 to join us. And so, Jason, what's your favorite movie? And maybe even in the movie, maybe your favorite moment in the movie, or emotional connection, or maybe just a favorite part.
Okay. Well, the favorite movies is going to be Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, no question. And it all has to do with flying aircrafts. When I was in high school, I was sure that I was going to go in the Air Force. I was going to be a pilot, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I did not want to fly cargo planes. But in my junior year, my eyesight started to go. So, and this will come back when we talk about hope, because my eyesight went. And so I had to back up again, give up something that I was hoping for. And instead, that's how I became an engineer, because I said, well, if I can't fly them, I can design. I can make them. I can make the airplanes. I can get around the airplanes. But yeah, that's got to be my favorite, just because of all the air stunts.
Yeah, it's incredible. To me, the second one, and they may have done this with the first one, but the second one where Tom Cruise takes all of those guys and trains them to fly so that they can film some of those scenes. They're not just filmed on black screen, or whatever it's called, black screen or whatever. They're actually flying in a lot of those scenes, which is incredible to me that he made them go through all that. But he's a little eccentric. And that's okay. I love those movies.
Yeah, well, you can afford to be when
You can afford to be. Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of Tom Cruise, maybe you can let us know, is April, is she a Tom Cruise person, or is she more, does she like the movies, and is it the Tom Cruise, or is it the planes? What's her thoughts on that?
I think she likes the movies just because she likes action movies mainly.
Gotcha.
It's awesome. I knew I liked her. That's awesome. That's not surprising. Well, Jason, I sure do appreciate you joining us, and we're looking forward to part 2, talking about some of our favorite things, and also taking them and putting them maybe in an area where we don't think about them like we really should. So I appreciate that.
Yep, thanks for having me.
This episode of Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis is brought to you by Daisy's Place. In 2003, little Daisy was fighting for her life. Each time she went into ICU, Carolyn, her mom, had no place to put her things or rest. Do you have a story like mine? When your loved one is in the hospital, the last thing you need to worry about is a place to rest. Daisy's Place is a free place to stay in Florence, Alabama, while your loved ones need you the most. Daisy's Place needs you. Share your gifts as a volunteer, spread the word, donate, and sponsor to help serve others in their time of need. Go to daisysplace.org. That's DAISYS-PLACE.org, or give Carolyn a call at 256-629-6729. That's 256-629-6729.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.